Thank you, Elena. My name is Pawel. I work for a PR firm here in Berlin called PIABO PR. We specialize in mostly tech companies, startups, and disruptor brands. So our business is usually working with companies that either hold a lot of data, that work with data, that innovate based on data, and position them mostly in Germany, but also in other German-speaking regions, the entire DACH region, to either help them scale their narrative, gain more brand awareness. And I think my role in this panel is basically to talk a little bit about the intersection of journalistic work and other factors that, like myself as a PR consultant, usually interfere with journalism, how data can help tell journalistic stories, but also what the pitfalls of those are.
Yeah, my name is Ulf. I work for a company called The Unbelievable Machine Company. I'm a data scientist and a mathematician, and yeah, I'm here to fill in the mathematical or technical gaps. Yeah, if you want to visit us, we have a panel over there, up there. There are colleagues of mine, so feel free to come.
Okay, hello. My name is Peter Fries. Not Fries, it's Fries actually. If you want to visit me, I work in Brussels for the European Commission. You can come. We have a very nice, sterile office building, but we are nice people. I'm actually working on social media on what we call start science, art, technology. I'm going to talk about this after this panel. And we are coming from the innovation perspective. So I work for DG Connect, which means it's the Ministry of the European Commission working on ICT. So we have all the things about big data, digitizing European industry, IoT, social media, media policy, you name it, right? I think what is interesting here in this data economy, there is an initiative, it's called Digital Euro Single Market. So the idea is for the European Commission to make the data flow as smooth as possible among Europe, where we have all kinds of different member states and national legislation. And there is actually a huge initiative linked to it, which is basically for all what is non-personal data, to bring in some regulation that this is harmonized across all the member states. And it's truly that we want this data economy to flourish. In 2016 was 60 billion market, 10% growth to 2015. And we don't want to be the obstacle. We want to make sure that in Europe, if you want a big continent, data can flow and this data economy can flourish. But I think we also want to make sure that there's some rights and rules guarded, that we have a look on privacy, and that we make sure that at the end it's good for society, right? Because if then, for example, we would only lose workplaces and everybody would be in the street, then we would say data economy is cool, but it doesn't work. So I think what we also want them to support, that as many people as possible can benefit from data economy.
Thank you very much for introducing yourselves and actually also putting it from a point of view, as we also discussed before, how we all interact with the term of like being a data journalist, and how do we work with journalists. So from each one's perspective, and you know, basically, Peter, you are running a program that would help and facilitate more the work of journalists. Ulf, you are pretty much assisting as a data scientist with cleaning the data. And Pawel, you are basically gathering the data as well and helping journalists. Yeah. And we, of course, as a media platform, that was also one of the reasons why I was really interested in moderating this panel. We deal with content every day, and we publish content every day on our media platform. So we said when we were briefing before as well that it's very important to, in order to start this conversation, to define things. It's always a good way to introduce these topics, and I think it's important from all of your perspectives to understand what do we define as data journalism. So perhaps maybe Ulf, you want to start as a data scientist defining data journalism?
Honestly, I have no clue. Not really, not really. I have a few ideas. But
please help us. Help him.
Help me. Yeah, as we talked before, I come from a very technical standpoint of view. So I've worked with natural language processing tools before, and I know what they are capable of. So there are tools out there they are not intelligent as this general AI discussion is going a little bit too far, but they become more intelligent, and in a few years we will have very, very sophisticated typewriters that can write their own stories, and we should be aware of that, and we should know how we deal with that as a society and as journalists. So, yeah. So, no, you help me.
Peter?
Yes. I think, first of all, we support two initiatives. There was a call for a proposal about European data network. So I think the basic idea is to say that from this data economy, everybody can benefit, and certainly that you would use tools to have all kinds of data, and I think to be more effective and efficient than where you produce stories. And the second time, maybe getting new insights about things you haven't seen before. So I think this data journalism is certainly a new thing coming up. When we had the preparation, I was also saying that our way of perception of what we are perceiving is going to change, right? Today I think it's always visual, but more and more we have sophisticated interfaces, and I don't talk about brain sensor or whatever. There might be also a different way we are sooner or later getting connected to a data universe. So I think we should also use this data journalism, not only say we do more of the same, but more efficient, but we could also transmit data and at the end stories in a different way.
Exactly, and on top of, I think, storytelling or the technology behind telling stories, data journalism is obviously also a trend that a lot of brands or companies trying to gain publicity have now started to use to put forth news that might not be actual news or what we have usually discovered. So it could also be a relatively dangerous trend, informing public opinion to a degree that changes our perspective, perception and our perspective of things at large, because we are more likely to tell stories that get clicks or that are popular based on readership data, rather than focusing on something that actually might be happening. And so this is something that we're noticing, a lot of inbound requests from journalists that have written up a whole editorial plan about maybe a client that I represent, and I have to support them with data that is just absolutely not true and not out there.
So you're touching on two topics that I think we should discuss extensively. One of them is, of course, the fear of who is going to be the author and whether there's going to be someone behind the machine after, like, if there's already someone making the content, creating it, reporting it. I mean, as I was telling you as well before, I'm amazed by Heliograph, which is this product affiliated with Washington Post, where they basically have produced like more than 1,000 articles without any journalist, just by itself. They covered pretty much the elections this year. Like, it had about a 20% increase of coverage because of this bot that was pretty much reporting all the information in the US. So on one hand, like, this is the question, like, will the role of the journalists be extinct? And on the other, how, like, are we preventing like fake news in that way? So choose your topic and please emerge.
Okay. I think about the fake news we could talk for hours, right? But we won't solve it. I think the fake news is a problem that often it's a tendency that we use fake news for polarization, for gaining opinion and power. I think it's also a problem that those who run the platforms like Facebook and others, they're not really willing often to collaborate in a way that how we could reduce the number of fake news. And it comes also down what we call media literacy, that people maybe have not the knowledge or don't know to deal with fake news and not to get an idea if news are actually wrong or false. So at the end, I think what we're also supporting is that you create more a reference system, that you have an idea of the news you get. They're coming from a reliable source, or you can actually use technologies, algorithms to make sure that this news are actually correct. I think what is, for me, very interesting is the idea about the future role of the journalist, right? Because the more we automatize news generation, the more is also maybe the danger that we actually are just creating noise. And I think the challenge will be for the journalist, beyond the machine, creating this additional interesting story and maybe tailoring it, of course, to the individual use and preferences, but make it in a way that's actually useful. And it's, I think, also interesting as a journalist. We are discussing that each profession has a certain ethic, or they have a feeling what the profession means. And I think the journalist still wants to bring out a story which has quality and speaks, and he would at the end say, I did it, I'm responsible for it. And I think now it comes to algorithm, it comes to more automation. It's certainly interesting, challenging for the future journalist.
So maybe you can also talk a little bit about your initiative to prevent fake news. I'd be interested to hear more about that, perhaps. Or do you want to touch upon it after and a little bit later? Or?
I can just say that we have now a new female minister from Bulgaria. And she was very cool and say, I don't like this idea about the fake news. So she was launching a huge initiative where you present invite many stakeholders from all disciplines, smaller and big players, to talk about what we can do, and later on come back with a sort of an action plan how we could in Europe tackle fake news. Of course, Twitter, Facebook, all the platforms are invited, and potentially it's going to certainly to be a mix about self-regulation. It's going to be a mix where we might ask platforms to be more distinct, and we will try to have better support programs about what you call media literacy. The basic idea is what I feel. Fake news is an easy topic because everybody can get it, but there's a problem behind, and I think we should look more on the problem, which is actually what is a trustful source. Have people still the knowledge that they can distinguish between what is wrong and right, that they just don't believe what they get on the screen. And of course also it comes down to the idea about the journalism, right? If you just bring out news and there's no more idea about can you control it, and then if it's coming from data, do you have still an idea if that's what you have is still reliable and true, right? And of course we have the idea that more and more people use it as a tool, a weapon, false information for spoiling elections and of course causing disturbances and also earning money. It's a way of earning money.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, and we've discussed this before, that the point about earning money with content is something that is so important these days, and it helps shape the stories that we tell and the content that is being produced and the way in which it is produced. So I always see, and I'm kind of proud of the media landscape in Germany, that the journalist is still a stakeholder, that it is still a protected job, that there is a lot of studies that are attached to it, because the journalist is not certainly just a content producer and shouldn't be. He's an editor, somebody who can determine the validity of a source for the time that maybe a reader might not, or in the instance when a reader cannot. Media literacy is certainly a great goal, but for the time being, the journalist has to do that. And yeah, and so moving forward, and Ulf and I had discussed this earlier, now thinking about data is not just numbers, it is not just quantitative data or qualitative data, but it goes into all dimensions, and you can talk about it in a bit, how many dimensions. And I think a lot of journalists now looking at data do not really know how to interpret them, do not know how to read them, and this is really troublesome also when journalism is in decline. Less journalists work at a publication, they have fewer time to prepare an article, to put something out, and on top of that they have to now learn how to deal with infinite amounts of data and the sheer volume into all these directions. So this is something that I would like to put out there, maybe there's a journalist here, that the role of journalist becomes much more important in data journalism.
Something crossed my mind. When we talked before, we never talked about YouTube, right?
True.
We completely forget. And I have a 17-year-old son, and all his information source, or maybe 90% of that, he watches YouTube. And there is a web of trust into that, because you talked about trust. All these YouTubers, they know each other. They took information from other sources, refer to each other, and that builds a very strong web of trust. I absolutely love him watching YouTube, consuming this new form of, it's a new form of journalism, right?
Well, that's what I was thinking, because I feel that because we're not any of us practicing directly, we're not journalists, self-proclaimed journalists. I feel that there is a bit of an issue, or we're intimidated, let's say, by defining the terminology, of actually understanding the terminology. But I think, if anything, nowadays, anyone can be a journalist. Yeah. Like, anyone can report on a topic. Right. Anyone can just be a YouTube influencer or YouTube TV channel producer. We use it. We always receive a lot of requests to publish articles by people who are not full-time journalists, or they're not employed by, they're not employed by a media portal. They may be even data scientists and writing articles. Content right now, everybody has a blog. Like, you can have your own blog and just be your own journalist. There's even like coverage on Twitter, like a lot of big incidents in the last decade has been covered by people who are not journalists. They just use the tools, and there's so many amazing tools out there to actually convey a message, right? If anything, that's the steps that we're taking. So I guess that can also be the future of data journalism, is using tools that can create the content, and then you are the one, you become your own self-proclaimed reporter on a topic and a situation. And then it comes to the point of discussing before, related to the authorship, as a PR person, as a person working with journalists all the time, you are giving them press releases all the time, and then sometimes, the press, what you've put together, it can be released in a portal verbatim. So who is actually the author of this content? Who is is a ghostwriter, or even entire books written by ghostwriters? So.
Yeah, I think that is, professionally, obviously it is great if I just see like word for word or paragraph by paragraph copies of a narrative that we have crafted for any of our client. But at the end of the day, yes, it is troublesome privately to see that there seems to be a lot less reflection about what is put out there, and then can be picked up by an algorithm or by some other machine-trained device to help put forth a much larger discussion, because I'm just sending out a press release, I'm just sending out like one statement, but it can very well, through the help of machines, become a narrative and a discourse, and that's potentially very dangerous. So I'm a big fan of human intervention in that, but not only dwelling on the negative, what data journalism has also told us is how we're the owners of our data, because we're using so many tools, so many apps. We're always inputting our own data, the data of our friends. We're connecting, and data privacy has become a huge thing, being heavily reported on in the media. And in terms of ownership, yes, we are the owner of our data. So what is it now the right of a journalist to edit our data or have access to our data to then give it back to us, or should we be in possession of that all along?
Excellent question. Who wants to answer this?
I can give a try. I think there's enough regulation out for the privacy of data. There's a new regulation, it's called the GDPR, since last year, and it tries to harmonize privacy rules across Europe for making sure that privacy is satisfied. Of course, the problem is often that it is applied. And at the same time, there's an idea to bring out some, I would say, guidance about how to deal with non-private data for just enabling business. I think the problem we often have in the privacy discussion, on the privacy issue, is not only what's going to happen to my data, but there's a business model behind which is asymmetric. So private data is the new currency. I get a service for free and the data are used, but those who provide the service gets more based on my data than I receive. So there's an asymmetry, actually, the way we use data and who's going to benefit in it. And I think it brings me back, if we talk about data journalism, more and more, and that's also democratization, we have user-generated content, right? And often boundaries are blurring who is the expert and who's maybe the amateur, but develops towards some expertise, right? So which means we should have a talk. First of all, I think data journalists need to know much better than others about privacy rules and regulation, that's for sure. But there could also be new ways to say, how can we remunerate people if we take data, if they're private? Or can we cooperate with people who are also smart, using data and creating their stories, and there's actually a collaboration between the journalist and the user generating content? Today you often think, oh, that's the expert, and the rest is just stupid. But no. And I think, for me, this idea, breaking the boundaries between the expert and the non-expert, and at the same time having a better idea about a symmetric business model, that would be beneficial if we could work on that.
Yeah, more community-driven approach. We should, and we are hopefully moving towards that direction. No, and I think privacy is a very important topic, starting with the GDPR, which is coming now in May 2018, and a lot of people are troubled by this. There's certainly data scientists working with this, lawyers, and there's a lot of different perspectives on this. And of course, everyone who is in control, everyone around us, each and every individual in different ways who are affected by it, and of course, journalists. But from a data scientist point of view, you are cleaning the data, you are working with the data. How will this affect your work?
It is my work to clean data.
No, the privacy.
Yeah, I know. A couple of customers came to us and told us to work with data that is privacy related, and there are some mathematical methods there to to put the real person behind the facade, to block that. It's not 100% safe, but it's relatively safe, so you have to decide if it's enough. So, yeah. That's basically it. I mean, we do the anonymization process, more or less, or we can put them in abstract classes, in bins maybe. If you have a distribution over an age, you say, okay, I don't go specifically into the exact age of the person. I just say he is in the range between 20 and 30, and that gives them a relatively good anonymization.
And then in that perspective, because it was a topic that we haven't touched yet, and I think it's important from your side as a data scientist, would that be part of your role in assisting a journalist when it comes to reporting a story, basically putting the limitations of privacy as well into play, and then maybe facilitating the tools to be used in order to report the story as accurately as possible?
Yeah, could be. I mean, I was just thinking about the other way around. I mean, I would love to work with something like the Panama Papers, where you want to expose specific persons that are related to crimes, right, or to crimes that are yet to be discovered. So I would love to have a data set like that. When somebody comes to me, I have this huge amount of data, can you help me to do something with that, summarize it, put it into topics, stuff like that. So it's not always about privacy, right? Maybe it's the other way around sometimes. It's
about exposing people, not anonymizing, but finding.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the technological aspect is really interesting to talk about how technology can help us tell different stories, because we simply can now automatically analyze data that usually took a journalist days and weeks to go through, but it can happen at the click of a button now.
Yeah, I think on that note, actually, with your question, I think maybe it's time to open this to the public and ask them some questions. Can anyone here? We were thinking before, and we were wondering within our group, basically, if there's anyone out there who can help us to define the terms and understand better, essentially how. I mean, we've been talking about how a data scientist can help a journalist, but from the other perspective, is there any journalist out there and wants to talk about how they can help a data scientist in the crowd? And I hope you're not shy. Yes.
Oh, yay.
Come. Come. Well, actually, ideally, someone should give you a mic, but I don't. Okay, there you go.
Good.
Perfect. Thank
Hello.
you.
Yep.
Hi.
I'm coming from Australia, and first of all, congratulations on holding these 2 days of event. Very good. Perhaps I'm going to be a devil's advocate here when talking about fake news and say, how is fake news different to the normal propaganda, which is a political tool used widely? And perhaps you might say that it might depend on where you stand on it or which side you're going to stand. So your view might differ. That's my first question. Secondly, a hardcore technical one. I don't know maths, or I'm not a very good mathematician. What is my future in data science, if there is any? Thank you. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Who wants to take this?
First or the second?
So, shall I start? Okay. Listen, on the fake news, of course, there are now many definitions coming out. We had an expert meeting this week in Brussels. And of course, you can say fake news has and will be some sort of an instrument in a political and a power game. I think what came out is that fake news potentially are not illegal, because often in Brussels you distinguish between legal and illegal content. So there must not be illegal, there can be both. But ultimately the idea is to destabilize and to polarize, to mix real and fake, the real and unreal, or true and untrue content. So often you have an element which is true, and then you have something which is not true. And you try to destabilize, to gain opinion, and of course you also try to make money on that, which happened recently. I think the propaganda has more the idea about bringing a certain political or radical opinion forward and polarizing, but I think propaganda is more for having maybe a political idea. The fake news, I would say, is more for disturbance, being powerful or getting money.
Interesting, because I'm thinking that basically fake news that were released were actually related to elections. So what is that not political? That is my point of view. But yeah, I actually do think that fake news is the new propaganda, or the new way you can put propaganda. It's just that I suppose from my perspective, and I'm jumping in to answer this from my side, is that fake news, the difference is that now we have all the tools to know the news. Like now we can actually analyze the data and get to the truth of it. Whereas when it came to propaganda, it was more emotional. So it was all like based on how, you couldn't really reveal or get to the bottom of it. Whereas now we know we can find the truth more, perhaps.
Yeah, but the problem is that we could think now we are smart in finding the truth, but more and more people are actually relying on their information bubble, and then even if the information is not true, they believe it's true. So in fact, the problem we often have is not if be it propaganda or fake news. The problem is that people can no longer distinguish if it's true or false. And then, of course, and there's also a mistrust against institutions. So some people say we don't trust the established news agency or broadcasting station. I trust my network. And then you have in the network the information circulating. And then if there's something which you think that's what I like, you believed it. And that's the problem we have. And that's actually, I think, the illness behind the fake news and propaganda. Because even in propaganda, you might think, which not always happens, that people should be smart enough to get the idea if it's wrong or false. The fake news now, and of course, don't forget, it's often about making money because you're working on the click thing, and you try to recuperate rapidly some dollars.
Any further comments on this?
Okay. I think we have a second question to answer. I mean, to me, I would just like to say, on the topic of fake news, I think fake news is a channel and a means for propaganda. Propaganda has always thrived when there was new technology, a new medium to explore that people were not familiar with. I think we have seen this in the 30s, in the 1930s with broadcasting, where people were lacking a sort or a sense of media literacy, and we're seeing this now with algorithms and the internet. And so, I mean, I think so media literacy holds more. So it's about changing the medium, it's about changing the channel. It's not only having one touch point with the outside world. I think this is important.